This is Jeff Smith. I don't know if you know who he is. Vaguely known artist, local. May have founded the show along with Lucy Caswell. No, Jeff is Jeff obviously massive name and one of the great self-publishing success stories of comics.
I like this part of the show.
Yeah, now's the time that I get fluff them up a little bit so I can tear them down later when I ask them all the hard questions. I'm Christian Hoffer. I'm a CXC board member, occasional journalist about comics, although it's been a couple of years since I did that seriously. Been involved with the show to some extent since 2017, I think.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yep.
I've worked with Jeff on CXC for 5, 6, 7. It's like 7 years.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we're just kind of to start things off. We were supposed to do this panel last year, and we'll kind of go into why that didn't happen here in a few minutes, and then we'll actually dive into the fun stuff, which is Jeff talking about cartoons and comics. Which, if you haven't heard him talk about comics, it's truly a highlight.
Last night I talked with Art Spiegelman and Francois Mouly about comics.
Yeah,
and we were supposed to cover some topics, like we were supposed to talk about banned books, but we just started talking about paper and pens and all the stuff that pretty impressed a lot. Yeah, and I never did ask her the question I wanted to ask her, which was she had to go next door where they had an elevator, take it to the roof, and get it over the alley to their roof, and then down one flight of stairs. And I never asked her, how'd you get over the alley? And I meant to, but
a good running start.
Yeah, push it really fast.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that I find, when you talk to other cartoonists, one of the things I find fascinating is you really hone in on the craft of making comics. You're always asking about the pens they use, the actual mediums that they use to create their work, and I find that to be fascinating. It's really not talked about because as a journalist, I don't know that stuff. I don't know the difference between pens, but you drill down to that, and it's always such a pleasure to watch you talk about that stuff because I think everyone learns something.
I learned that, and I must have heard this before, but Raw magazine, which he and Francois published together, it was groundbreaking for the indie scene that exists, that this show celebrates, would not exist without Raw magazine. That's kind of where it started, and Mouse was first serialized in that. But some of it was in black and white, some of it was in color. But it was big and bright, and Francois was really into I want big swaths of color over here and space. And Art wanted Mouse to be a smaller insert within this giant book. And this is the part I didn't know. He wanted it, as far as these big, giant, colorful pieces, he wanted something that looked like the equivalent of prose.
Oh.
So he just did a little tiny, scribbly, black and white artwork, it's really good. Mm-hmm. And if there's any way you're unfamiliar with Mouse, the conceit that it's about World War II at his father's time during the Holocaust, but all the Jews are depicted as mice and all the Nazis as cats. And that is so brilliant because it lets your brain take your mind off of the horror. Mm-hmm. And you read the story about the Jews and the cats and the mice, but all of a sudden it really happens.
Yeah. To
those characters, and you understand way more about the horror of that thing.
Yeah, it doesn't downplay the usually when you are dealing with anthropomorphic animals, that's a way to simplify things, and in this case it really just hones in the horror in a very unexpected way. Especially keep in mind now Mouse has really led to many other works taking that using animals as a way to display raw horror, raw tragedy and stuff like that. But Mouse at the time, it was one of the first things to do something like that.
Yeah.
And it made it that much more powerful. Now, do you think, since we're talking about Raw magazine, do you think that since it's this big, bright, brash, magazine, and Mouse, obviously is small, do you think that the contrast, between what the other stuff that you saw in Raw and then Mouse, which is this very serious autobiographical work, do you think the contrast kind of gets lost in the collection of Mouse? Because now Mouse, obviously, you can buy it. It's one of the most popular collected comics in the world.
No, I think it actually is so good.
Yeah.
That it's okay to be alone. It stands. It's okay.
No, it's one of the I guess that kind of this is a natural lead-in to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about, because one of the things, your first work was Thorn, which has now recently been collected.
Yes.
Obviously, if you haven't had the chance to read, it's literally Jeff's, I believe it's your first published work, technically.
It was our first self-published work.
Yeah.
My girlfriend at the time, Vijaya, we were in school. We went to OSU, and in the Lantern, I did a daily comic strip, Monday through Friday, every day for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of like a dry run of Bone. I learned a lot of things that didn't work. I learned a lot of things that did work. Mm-hmm. So that was really fun. And I wasn't quite as clean of a drawer as I became after all that practice. But what's interesting to me about Thorn is that we did it as a Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Instead of the normal. You wanted to talk about this, but I'm not sure I'm doing it the right way.
Hey, listen.
Am I jumping ahead?
There's no such thing.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so, let's talk about the Kickstarter, because that's now, what, your second Kickstarter? Third, because you did two Tukis.
Are these mics picking us up? Is that all?
Everyone can hear us okay?
Okay.
All right. So that was your third Kickstarter. So let's talk a little bit about Kickstarter and self-publishing in general, because now it very much seems that Kickstarters are one of the dominant ways that self-publishing comics kind of persists. It is and I've always found it interesting. And I usually when people self-publish comics and they're doing Kickstarters, it's both the capital fund. It's a way to raise capital to actually print and produce the comics to pay the people involved. And also it acts as pre-ordering. But obviously, Jeff, you're a super successful cartoonist. Why did you choose to run Kickstarter projects? Was that a way?
That's an excellent question.
It is.
So Thorn was actually our second Kickstarter project. Our first one was Tuki, my new project that after I finished Rassle, Bone, then Rassle, then Tuki. And I had prepared Tuki. I had tried it out as a webcomic. But I was going to do it as a book. And I had enough material to do 2 books. I want it to be about a six book series. And I wanted to, on my first Kickstarter, I was going to do book 1 and book 2. And we contacted, there used to be, when I started Bone, there were 17 distributors all over the U.S., Canada, some in Britain, in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And there was a big fallout in the mid-90s. Marvel just decided to buy the third. There was Marvel, a company called Marvel. Wait a minute. There was the distributors. There were the top 3 big distributors were Diamond, Capital, and what was the third one?
I can't remember, but yeah.
But Marvel bought the third biggest one, and suddenly said you could only get Marvel comics through this one. Wish I could remember the name of it.
Well, and it's funny because they did that again recently.
They did?
They pulled out of Diamond. Yeah. Which, I mean, people have thoughts about that because now they distribute through, I believe, they basically created an imprint through a distributor through, I forget, what comic book store. It was literally DCBS or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was like one of those online stores.
Yeah.
All right, so just for anybody that's not familiar with the comic book world, all comic books, Marvel, DC, Fantagraphics, Dark Knight, self-publishers like me, all go through a distributor who puts out a catalog every month. And the comic book store retailers every month have to go through a book as big as a phone book and order the comic books they want to have sent to them that they're going to stock the shelves with. So, but this catalog comes out about 3 months or so before the books ship. But then we, the comic book publishers, we have to have our material into them even a few months before that. So I've got to decide what the cover of the book's going to be, what the comics, that issue is going to be about, at least 4 months before I have to have it sent to the printer. So that's the distributor. That's the way it basically worked. And there were, as we were saying, there were 2 really big distributors, and Marvel bought the 3rd biggest and made their comics only available through them, which threw the industry into a turmoil.
Yeah.
I mean, the other distributors started dropping like flies, and they all owed me money. Oh yeah, we went down holding a big bag of empty.
Okay.
Yeah, it was bad. Because and the stores started falling too.
Yeah.
Comic book stores were kind of in trouble because there were all sorts of parameters that they were putting on their orders. The reason I'm telling you all this, I'll explain it in a second. But it really ended up after a couple of years that really Diamond was the only one left. All the other ones went down, and Marvel had to go back to Diamond.
Yeah.
Well, and I've actually had a really good run with Diamond. I had a good run with all the distributors. They, for some reason, accepted Bone. And in fact, I never understood it, but I always thought I'd be lucky if, people that read Fantagraphics or Dark Horse, who were all kind of cartoon heads, I thought they might get that. Mm-hmm. They might get that it's Bugs Bunny meets the Lord of the Rings kind of thing. But really, I didn't really have that great of a time with that side of the comic world. And I really didn't think that, like, Wizard, I think the first issue of Wizard magazine, I don't know if you guys remember that? The first issue that came out the same week that the first issue of Bone came out. So I was aware of them. They kind of were aware of me. But Wizard, which was very dedicated to Image and superheroes, just decided to like Bone all of a sudden. I mean, and I had no say in it. I was very lucky. They just started doing stories and interviews, starting to put it in their catalog, their little price list.
Yeah.
Anyway, ended up Diamond was the only retailer standing, and they just have done very well by me, and we try to do well by them. When we decided to do Tuki, we had done Rassle through Diamond. We decided to do Tuki with our Kickstarter. Well, we hadn't done. Okay, we had not decided to do it as a Kickstarter yet. Have I got that right, Kat? Okay. We called our Diamond representative and said, "Hey, Rassle's finished. We've got a new book. It's called Tuki." We told him what it was about. It's about one of the earliest of our human ancestors to control fire and eat cooked food, and it's going to be all about evolution and how everybody else felt about that. And he goes, "All right, I'll give you a call in a couple of days." And so we got a call from him, and he said, "We'll order 500 copies for the entire country." I went, what? I said, "Why?" And apparently the last few issues of Rassle had shrunk or something, but I still thought, man, the new #1 is going to do all right. Well, anyway, so we said, okay, well, we'll still retail it through Diamond, but first we're going to sell it through Kickstarter. And we sold like 3,000 copies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of a graphic novel, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's decent. And there were 2 books, so we sold 6,000.
And it also, did that kind of like heighten the awareness of Tuki? Because, I remember when you announced that Kickstarter, people went, "Oh, Jeff Smith is, doing a Kickstarter. That's a big deal. And it's his new comic, and that's a big deal." So that kind of helped drive sales when you eventually...
It did. When Kickstarter started, me and the other self-publishers all thought, well, that's for new people who aren't established. And I didn't think I would be welcome to do it. I thought I'd be taking money from people that are trying to get money. I mean, I still needed money, but I didn't need it as much. But that was years ago. And I was talking with a couple other self-publisher friends from the 90s, Billy Tucci,
Yeah.
Brian Polito. In fact, it was actually their wives who are also their business partners, just like Vijay is mine. And they were telling Vijay, you got to try this Kickstarter stuff. And I thought, well, they're kind of in the same boat I'm in. So we said, okay, we'll do it. And the Kickstarter got really excited about us jumping in. They were helping us. They were giving us advice, and we did it. And we've done 2 Kickstarter campaigns, one for Tuki and one for Thorn, and they've done very well.
Yeah.
And then after we're done, we give it to Diamond, and they get their 500 copies.
Were there any like one of the comparisons I wanted to ask you about was when you were first self-publishing Bone, and were there any like lessons that you learned during those early days of publishing Bone that kind of came in handy when you were doing like the Kickstarters, or were they just 2 completely totally different experiences?
They were kind of very different experiences. Well, I mean, except for the fact that Diamond thought I wouldn't sell any. That was very similar to my last one, to Bone. But Bone, I went through a process of, there were so many distributors, and there were some distributors that were more friendly to the smaller indie comics. Mm-hmm. And the indie scene had been going on for, about almost 10 years by 1991, mm-hmm. And so some of them were really good. And Comics Hawaii was great. Capital was actually better than Diamond. I'm trying to remember. I don't need to remember names. I won't say names. We had a good. I learned a lot. It took a little over a year before anything started happening with Bone. Mm. And I had made a deal with my wife because I owned an animation company, and I was tired of staring into a light bulb and drawing the same picture over and over and over. And I wanted to go back to doing Bone. And I went to a comic book store, and I discovered Mouse, Cerebus, Love and Rockets, 8 Ball, and The Tick, the first issue of The Tick. And I could see all these guys. I mean, they weren't all self-publishers. Some of them were. But they were in charge. They owned the copyrights. These were their characters, their stories, and they were in charge of them. And I said, that's what I want to do. So I went to my wife and I said, okay, I want to sell my animation company to my 2 partners and start a black and white indie comic. And then I went like this. And she didn't. She liked my cartoons, and she loves comics and cartoons too. And what happened is what she said, okay, I'm backing you on this, but you've got to write a business plan. So in other words, you got to understand how the money works, how fast it's going to come in and go out. And how are you going to publicize it? How does this business work? All the stuff I just told you about distributors, I did not know that then. And the other thing she said, how long do you want to do it before you stop if it's not working? I said a year, 6 issues. I'm going to do it. I was looking at most of the comic books were bi-monthly. Cerebus might have been monthly, but everything else was bi-monthly. So I thought, that's 6 issues, that's a year. So I'll do 6 issues. If there's no reason to believe there's anything happening, I'll go to Disney and see if I can get a job as an animator or something. Well, we did it. We jumped in. We learned as much as we could about the industry, how it worked. We figured we had to get on the road. Oh, I know one thing that happened. I got a call from Charles Vess. At first, I was still working at my animation studio for like the first year because I didn't know if this was going to work. So I was doing my comic book, at night and on weekends and stuff. So when the 3rd issue of Bone came out, I got a call from Charles Vess, and I knew who Charles Vess was. And he says, I love this book. I love it. I love the covers. I love the story. I love the characters. I love the woods. He goes, "Are you going to go to San Diego this year?" I said, "What's San Diego?" He goes, "Okay, listen. It's the San Diego Comic-Con. It's in San Diego, California. Everybody goes there. Everybody goes there. In fact, it was probably, I don't know, it was probably summer already, but it was in July." He says, "If you could get yourself to San Diego, you could have half my table. Just bring books to sell and just get yourself there." And I said, "Okay, San Diego, what's San Diego?" Well, I went to San Diego and had my doors blown off. I had no idea. And it was compared to now, I think it's like 150,000 people.
Yeah.
It was like 45,000 people. That still blew my mind. And I was sitting next to Charles Vess, so two things. Of course, all the people that love Charles Vess and fantasy and Neil Gaiman are coming to see Charles, and then they're seeing my stuff. And Charles is going, "Check it out." Thank you, Charles. And the other thing is that Charles is, he's been around the industry for so long, and everybody knows him and loves him and respects him. So all the people that run San Diego, that run the show, are all coming by to say hi to Charles and meeting me, and which that ended up being good because the next couple of years they were giving me opportunities to do posters and do things, and it really grew really fast after that.
What would you say? So, obviously San Diego still around, New York
Yeah.
Comic Con still around, but we were talking about this a little bit earlier. For the up and coming comics artists, the Jeff Smiths of today, back when you were just getting your start, what are the shows to go to? Like what besides CXC, obviously.
Well, I mean, there is the indie shows that are a thing now. I think the first one I heard of was Ape, which was out near San Francisco.
Yeah.
And then came SPX, and I actually knew the guys that were starting SPX, and I was at the first one. The guy he dug a big pit, and we went out to like a picnic area where we played softball. We invited Diamond to come, and we played against Diamond, and then we dug a big pit and roasted a pig, and it was all these cartoonists, all these us little grubby indie guys, don't have any money, and we're just having a great time. Holy fuck, it was good. I mean, man, you're just pulling pieces of a ham that's been cooking for overnight, and oh my God, it was so good. And then Diamond hired the guy that owns Diamond owns the Baltimore Orioles.
Yeah, he has got an ownership, or at least he used to.
A couple of those guys are going, "Hey, wait a minute, what's he doing here?" "Oh, he works in the warehouse." They creamed us. They creamed us. But we did that for like the first 4 or 5 years. So I loved SPX, and I went there for a long time. And then Lucy Caswell, she's the original founding curator of the Billy Ireland Cartooning Museum at Ohio State. And I've known her practically since she had just started. I think she'd been going 4 or 5 years when I started going and doing Thorn in the newspaper. And I met this lady who was from Texas and talked very proper and was a librarian, but she knew comics, man.
She does.
She knows comics, and she knows every creator. And even then, she'd only been, there was no such thing as a comics library at that time. Even at that point when I met her, she was already going to like places where cartoonists were, like the National Cartoonist Society. They have a Reuben dinner. And she's going in there and she's telling people, you guys are important. You're artists. I'm an academic. I know this. She wasn't telling them that. I'm adding that. And I felt the reaction to cartoonists being told they weren't junk. I felt the energy, and they loved her. And I love her too. I mean, she's still one of my best friends, and I consider her my mentor. She introduced me to Art Spiegelman. She introduced me to Will Eisner. And when I was ready to do the comic book, I'd already met Will Eisner twice, very casually at these things, and I remember I did the first issue, had 24 pages I think I did done, black and white ink, but I made Xerox copies of them, and I sent them to Will because somebody had told me if you got to put this in a catalog. It's going to be in the Diamond catalog. It's going to be in 17 catalogs. But it would really help if you had some established artist who would tell you, say, check out this book. It's really good. So I sent my Xeroxes of the first issue of Bone to Will Eisner and a couple other cartoonists. But Will's came back, and he just said glowing things that just blew my mind. And he says, and you can use this wherever you want. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you. And I did, and I have met many, many retailers over the years who have told me that that's why they gave it a shot.
Now...
Did I in any way answer whatever question you
we've gone on a journey, my friend. Well, I did want to so Thorn and Bone, you talked about, you learned what did work and what didn't work with Thorn. How much of Bone, the story, the big overarching plot line, because, one of the things I think kind of gets, I don't want to say lost about Bone, it's one of the great fantasy comics of all time. How much of that was already in your head when you were doing Thorn?
It was in my head, and it is in Thorn, much the way it is in the comic book, because that was one of the things I learned worked. So there's basically the humor is based on these three little cartoon characters land in a fairy tale world.
Yeah.
But the humor was all about them, the fish out of water humor. Phony, who's Scrooge McDuck, has to barter it with eggs instead of money, or whatever. The Phone Bone has to dig out cow shit out of the barn in order to, make a living or have somewhere to stay. But very slowly it starts up. You meet a dragon. You realize that when Phone Bone sees a dragon and Thorn says dragons don't exist, you realize there's some kind of secret or something going on. And Grandma knows about the dragon, so there's a mystery going on here. Yeah. You meet the rat creatures, and slowly built up the Lord of the Rings kind of type of fantasy. There's nothing really like the Lord of the Rings fantasy, but that just appears. It's nowhere near the scale in the comic strip that it ends up in the comic book. But I learned about it, and I learned how to get people's reactions, how to get people excited about it. You have 4 panels. The first panel, you have to remind everybody where they were yesterday. Then you got a couple panels to tell the joke, but you also have to move it toward tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I learned how to do that. And the first few issues of Bone, the comic book, are like that. You'll see little bits that are comic strip like, where each page ends with a punchline or something like that. As soon as I was able to, as soon as the bigger story took prominence in the comic book, never really happened in the comic strip. Yeah, I was able to just concentrate on trying to make this a piece of storytelling that people want to read. Mm-hmm. It was fun.
I did want to touch on one more thing in Bone, and I bring this up because it was a conversation that me and Tom Spurgeon had a long time ago, talking about your landscapes. I think that's one of your strengths is you draw these absolutely gorgeous forests, Old Man's Cave, things like that. Where do you pull inspiration from? These...
Well, Old Man's Cave is a real place.
That's a real place. Obviously.
A real place about 40 miles, 45 miles south of Columbus.
I walked right into that one.
Yeah. I really do love Old Man's Cave, and I love the trees, and it's got trees growing on top of rocks and boulders. I love that kind of stuff, but artistically, mostly from Walt Kelly, who did Pogo. And the way he could use thicks and thins and thick black areas to put distance between things and show trees off in the distance and close-up stuff up right in your face. Almost, it's so close to the camera, so to speak, that it doesn't have light in front of it, so it's black. And he's where I got that from. And I realized later, as I was doing Bone, even in the comic strip, but in the comic book mostly, that I was really putting in a lot more detail and stuff than a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. But I thought that's how you did it. So I just gave myself carpal tunnel for no reason.
Well, that's a weird segue into the last thing I wanted to talk about, which was why we didn't have this panel last year. So, let's
be healthy, cartoonists.
Yes. So, obviously, I'm glad that we got to do this.
Me
but
too.
You had a little bit of a health scare last year,
Yes.
and I might be understating that a little bit. But
Yeah.
What happened?
Okay. It was right before SPX. I mean, CXC. And I basically had a cardiac arrest, which is not. I thought was just another word for a heart attack, but it's not. It's a heart attack to infinity, and then there's a hard stop. You die. And I had this event on a Sunday morning. I went into the kitchen and woke up like 2 months later in a hospital. But that morning, my wife was upstairs. Thank God I did this at home. She heard me fall in the kitchen and break a glass. But when she didn't hear me cussing, being swearing or anything, she got worried and came down. Found me, got on the phone, and they had her pumping my chest. And the firehouse is only 3 blocks from our house.
Thank God for that.
I was very lucky. They came and were able to get me, at least, if not started, prepped and able to get to an emergency room. And they saved me. And it was at least a couple weeks before I woke up.
Wow.
So I did it. So I woke up, was like, it looked a lot like this, actually. And except then my wife leaned in, and I'm like, "Oh, hi." And then I found out what happened. I didn't know.
And it's obviously I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're okay. But we've had several high-profile comic stuffs this year. Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball, John Cassaday.
Cassaday, he had the same thing.
Yeah,
right?
and.
Well, I only learned this recently, probably because it's starting to happen. The survival rate of a cardiac arrest is like 10%.
Yeah. Yeah.
90% of people that have what I have don't wake up.
Yeah, that's.
If you're at home by yourself, if I had been by myself, that would have been it.
Yeah, I mean that's what happened to my grandfather. It happened with my dad too, but there was somebody close by. So. What is it, I think that, we see this a lot in Japanese cartoonists. They all seem to have perennially bad health, and I think it gets understated with U.S. cartoonists. But what is it about cartooning that, makes it's a hard industry. You think that just sitting and drawing isn't hard on the body, but it is.
It's very hard on the body. I did have carpal tunnel.
Yeah.
Well, that's another story. I won't, it's a good story, but it's longer. So, I think it has something to do with the deadlines, which is a lot of pressure. Even for just regular guys the script is done, somebody pencils it, somebody inks it, somebody colors it, somebody letters it, all that stuff. For us indie guys, you got to do the whole thing. And even if you have 2 months, to do 20, 22 pages, that's a lot. It takes a lot of focus time. And you are kind of grabbing things to eat and shove down. You eat chips, you eat hamburgers, you eat tacos, and pizza. I mean, I love that stuff. I love that stuff. I'm not kidding around here. I wasn't desperate. I was having a ball. Pepperoni pizza.
So
I haven't had that in a year.
Oh man.
I haven't had a hamburger in a year. I haven't had a hot dog in a year. I've had the plant-based hot dogs.
How are those?
They'll do. You still get to pile on, jalapenos and onions and no cheese.
Yeah.
Oh. I have not had cheese or beef in a year.
I would say I'm sorry to hear that, but if it means keeping you around a little longer, it's a sacrifice I'm willing for you to make.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds like a deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there any advice, to try to prevent this? Because, I think like your entire generation of, cartoonists have, kind of had to live with this kind of unseen burden of, the stress and the deadlines. Is there anything that you wish you could have done that maybe would have helped your health? Because, I'll be blunt, Jeff, you look like one of the healthiest cartoonists I've met. That's
Well,
why it came out of the blue for me.
well, it came out of the blue for me.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Because I used to run. I do a little weightlifting. I live half the year in Key West, and my wife and I ride bicycles everywhere because it's just a little island that's about the size of German Village.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. But I guess I just ate a lot more hamburgers. So moderation. That's all I can say. You don't have to quit anything. I'm quitting something because I got scared straight. But there's nothing wrong with a hamburger. Just don't eat one every day. Unless you don't care. Then have at it.
Well, I'll turn it over to the to the audience for questions. But before we get jump into that, what's on the horizon for you? What's next?
Well, I've got my new series, which is called Tuki, which takes place 2 million years ago, which is about the time we see the earliest fire pits and with cooked animals in them and stuff like that. And that was our ancestor Homo erectus, who, unlike Australopithecus, the famous Lucy walked around upright on two legs and was our first human ancestor, the first potential human. She was basically a human from the waist down and a chimpanzee from the waist up. Although she was already starting to, her brain was enlarging. But at the 2 million year mark, things were changing because there was Paranthropus boisei, there was Homo habilis, there was a number of steps and very identifiable separate species that evolved until you got to Homo erectus, when some major things happened. Then you had someone who stood really upright, didn't have hair. Part of that was the savannas were widening and the jungles were backing up, and they were drier and hotter in some ways. They were learning to sweat.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at a skull in order to do this story, I obviously had to deep dive into some research. But I thought this part was cool. Because I go, okay, I'm going to have this character. He's a Homo erectus. He knows how to start a fire, and he eats cooked food, which makes him larger and stronger and smarter. But when archaeologists, anthropologists too, when they look at the underside of a Homo erectus' skull, they see a voice box, a space for a voice box there, which is large and long, which anthropologists know that means they have a voice box where they can modulate and control sound. And so that's the sign of someone who can speak. Also, on the inside of the skull near the forehead, there are two indents in the skull where Broca's areas were. And Broca's area is a place in our brain where speech comes from. And that first appears in the Homo erectus. And if a Homo erectus, if you shaved him, put him in a suit, a little running suit, and put him on a bus, nobody would even look at him. He would look a little intense. He might growl. But you might not think he was from 2 million years ago. So it was really the first one of us in our shape. And so I thought that was very interesting. And so I did all sorts of research so I could have the other characters. And I needed a story because I like to tell stories and fantasy. And I decided that this character and his species was, kind of lone wolfing it around or in small bands, making little fires and cooking their meat and eating it. And I thought, Australopithecus was the Lucy monkey human, was still around. Not for much longer, but was still walking around Africa at that time. So was Parathropus boise and Homo habilis. Homo habilis was the first to be associated with carved tools, stone tools, and used the stone tools to kind of like take over. So I thought the Homo habilis would not like it that these new guys coming in, all unhairy, skinny little chicken-looking people, have fire, which was terrifying because that is a god power.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided that they would kill anybody that they found using fire. They felt that was against human nature, and so, well, I'm using my imagination a little bit, but there's. I thought that would be a good story. So as I finished the second book, which I do have, both books are here. They're at Gibbs' table at Laughing Ogre. He meets two children whose parents were killed by these guys, and he kind of takes them in. But they're fire people too, so they're not scared of the fire, and they help him hunt. They help him do things, but they're constantly being chased because the Homo habilis, who they call habos, are trying to erase them. Again, what was your question originally about?
It was, what do you have coming up next?
Oh, yes. The rest of that story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to the audience for questions.
All right.
We'll go with the person in the cosplay.
Yay! Okay, so Smiley's my favorite. I love him so much.
Yay.
But there's such a distinct visual and personality difference in the beginning versus towards he's got his big smug smile and a cigar, but in the end towards there's a shift in being very silly and childish. And what was your idea with the tone shift of his character?
Bartleby. He, in fact, it was not in my plan. I mean, I had outlines. I didn't have detailed plans for every issue or even every thing I wanted to do. I just had tent poles that I knew the story would go to. I knew Phone would meet Thorn and her grandma and stuff like that. Then you'd meet the dragon. That was kind of all the same tent pole. Meeting the core little group at her farmhouse. Then the next thing was going to be Rockjaw, going up in the mountains. And I forget what the next thing was. Oh, the big Harvest Moon parade balloon, big phony bone parade balloon thing. That kind of stuff. I had that, and I just had pages where I could go in and jot down notes and ideas. And in my original plan, there's a story in the comic book. We have copies of the collection of the comic strips too. But Phonebone finds a little lost bear cub, not a little rat creature cub, and takes him up into the mountains and meets Rockjaw. And it's the same story. And I was going to do that in the comic book as well. But as I said earlier, I had to decide what the story was going to be about and draw the cover 4 months ahead of, but before I was even a few months before I was even drawing the book. So I drew the cover, and I wish I had it here. I don't. But it's the Phonebone's there, and from behind is the little bear cub. But the way I looked at the picture, and I thought that little cub from the back looks like a baby rat creature. And I said, that might make a more interesting story. And so he's going to take up but he enlists Smiley in this. And a relationship between Smiley and the rat creature, which I didn't see coming at all, changed Smiley. He really loved this little rat creature. And that was really fun to do because, I mean, as soon as I saw it happening, then it was just, I couldn't wait to do it. It was just really fun. And then, of course, they do give him back They get him back home to his people, and he has to say goodbye to them. And oh, that was heartbreaking. But he comes back.
I'm happy to see that you're in good health. When was the last face-to-face interaction you had with Cerebus Creed or Date Set?
It was actually not bad, but it was a long time ago. It was probably 10 years ago. We were up at the TCAF, the Toronto show that CXE is loosely based on, and we happened to be in the comic book store. I went to a comic book store just to see the local comic book shop, and I ran into him, and we were fine. Time had gone by, and I mean we didn't really rekindle we didn't go out and have a beer or anything, but we hung out for a while and it was good. So the last meeting was good, and that was kind of the end of him writing stupid shit about me. So that was good.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll go over here.
Yeah, so Bone has been really prolific in my generation with elementary school and like middle school and having that in our libraries. Like when I think of books from my childhood, there's like 5, and Bone is one that comes to mind. And I think a lot of people, especially of Gen Z, would probably think the same. How has that been significant for you?
Oh, it changed my life. I mean, I went from selling, thousands of copies to millions. It's a big difference. It's a huge difference. And going to events like this, especially like in San Diego, I mean, it's a whole different ball game. Scholastic goes there with me, and they're helping. I can't even really explain. Oh, they had a phone bone costume made, which I would love to. I don't remember where that ended up. We don't have it, but they hired some woman who actually does this. She's not Snoopy, but she does other little mascots like that. So I'm in San Diego, or maybe we might have done it in New York first, and they go, okay, here comes the costume. Oh my God, here comes Phone Bone walking around the corner. And what happened then was astonishing. And this is now not just me and my wife alone doing this, but we were never doing it alone. Kathleen Glowson, who's our production manager and helps us with everything, is sitting right here in the front row and has been with us for close to 30 years. Sorry. Sorry we ruined your life. But the excitement that happened when that character walked around the corner, the crowds that came, San Diego, and I mean, New York Comic Con is crowded.
Yeah.
It is a mob scene. And suddenly there was a sea of crowds. And then someone kind of was saying to us, there's a Sam and Max costume guy, and he's got a huge crowd with him, and he's heading this way. And the two crowds came together. I mean, it looked like we were, at a playoff game or something, and your team just won because everybody is on the field. There's thousands and thousands of people, and all I can just see is Sam and Max. We're like 50 yards away. Because everything kind of moved that way. And I could see Phone Bone's head and Sam and Max's head. And they kind of meet each other, and I don't know what they said. They probably went, how do we get out of here? My world changed when Scholastic took it over. Because they were the very first mainstream world publishers to do a graphic novel imprint for middle-aged readers, young to middle-aged readers. And they launched that imprint with Bone. So Bone went right out the gate to a shocked, or at least not shocked, but with no warning to the real world at all. And I bought books from that. You put it on your list. Sorry, I just got the 5-minute warning. My life changed. We'll get some room for more questions.
In the back.
Hi. What's a good way to start with drawing comic books? How to break the ice?
You mean with just you and the comic book, or you taking your comic book into the world? Do you have you got your story? Do you have a character?
Yes, I have a character.
Do you have a story for this character?
Yes.
Well, you're ahead of the game already. So relax a little bit. And the trick is to come up with a story that somebody besides your mom will like. That's actually a little harder to do than you think. I found it to be so anyway. But if you come up with a little story, and it doesn't have to be a long story like Bone, most comics aren't that. But the one comic book has to have something has to happen. That there's things are one way at the beginning and have them be a little different at the end. That is probably the most important lesson in writing that I learned or was told by Neil Gaiman or somebody.
Cool.
So I recently became interested in writing for kids. I don't know if Bone was originally meant for kids, but there's this balance between like trying to tell a smart and entertaining story and not talk down to the kids. So how do you think you
I nailed it.
Yeah.
like how?
No, I didn't nail it. I wasn't trying at all to write for kids. I was writing, my favorite comics are Peanuts, Pogo. And I love the Looney Tunes. I love Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck. That's what I like. And that's what I made it, as we said earlier, I made it to Bone Cousins when I was young, when I was a little kid. But I just kind of did stories that were like Donald Duck, Bugs Bunny, just little stories like that. Until I was getting older into high school, and I got into, did I say that here too? I've told the story this weekend already. Okay, my junior year of high school, that summer, my summer before my senior year in high school, my best friend talked me into reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time. The first issue of Heavy Metal came out.
Oh.
I'm like, okay, I'm kind of excited about this. I don't want to be an elf, but I like to read about it. I was talking to some people who wanted to be elves. And then the last thing that happened that summer, this was the summer of 1977, was Star Wars came out. And I was gone. All I wanted to do was go into the world of Frank Frazetta and Luke Skywalker and bring Uncle Scrooge with me. And I did.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an obvious idea. But I tell you, boy, first couple issues, people were like, what? What made you think this would work? I thought it was obvious. But anyway, it was. I didn't hear anything from anybody until the third issue. And that's when I heard from Charles Vess. I started hearing from, there was a guy in Toronto who did a TV show about comics.
Yeah.
And he wanted to interview me. And then he sent me, I said, well, cool. And then he sent me some videotapes of the show. But this is back when the videotapes was how you watched the show. He said, watch this one to the end. And I watched it. And at the very end of it, he says, so Neil Gaiman, what are you reading right now? And I have 0 minutes left. Neil Gaiman said, I'm reading this book. There's 3 issues out of it. It's this little weird book by a guy named Jeff Smith called Bone. And it's fantastic. I love it. I highly recommend it. And I just went backwards out of my chair. That was the best news I ever got. And I really want to thank everyone for coming and sticking it out to the end. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.